My wife warned me her parents would reject our daughter. I didn't believe her until they showed up to the baptism with a different baby. My wife had been estranged from her parents for almost 3 years when they reached out asking to reconcile. We were planning our daughter's baptism, and I suggested we invite them as a nice gesture. My wife hesitated for a long time before agreeing. The night before, she told me, they're going to do something. They won't be able to help themselves. I told her she was being paranoid. I had no idea what she was actually bracing for. They arrived 20 minutes late to the church, which my wife said was typical. What wasn't typical was the infant in her mother's arms, wrapped in a blue blanket. I blinked a few times like my eyes were playing tricks on me. I leaned over to my wife. Whose baby is that? My wife's face went pale, but she didn't answer, just stared straight ahead at the altar like she was waiting for something inevitable. Her parents shuffled into the pew across the aisle from us without greeting us, or even glancing at their actual granddaughter in my wife's arms. Not a wave, not a smile, nothing. Her mother kept looking at our daughter with this pinched expression like she smelled something rotten, then back down at the baby boy in her own arms with something like satisfaction. I kept looking between them and my wife, trying to understand what I was missing. I leaned over again. Babe, what is happening? She just shook her head slightly and said, wait, without looking at me. Her father pulled out a small camera and started taking photos of the church interior, like he was documenting the venue for some reason. Her mother adjusted the blanket around the baby and whispered something to her husband. They both nodded. My stomach started to churn because something was deeply wrong and everyone seemed to know it except me. My in-laws exchanged a glance like they were running through a checklist. My wife gripped our daughter tighter. I looked at my wife's profile and realized she wasn't confused at all. She was waiting. She'd been waiting since the moment she agreed to invite them, and whatever she'd been expecting was about to happen. The priest began his opening remarks about the sacrament of baptism and the welcoming of children into the faith. He asked which family was presenting their child today. My wife started to stand, but my mother-in-law moved faster. She stood up from the pew across the aisle, walked straight to the altar, and presented the baby boy to the priest with a proud smile. We're ready, Father. The priest looked down at the baby, then at his notes, then at us still sitting in the pew with our actual daughter in my wife's arms. His face shifted into confusion. I couldn't move. My brain genuinely could not process what I was seeing. My wife stood up slowly. Our daughter clutched against her chest. Mom, what are you doing? Her mother didn't even turn around. She just smoothed the baby's hair and said, we're baptizing the baby, like my wife had asked what time it was. My wife took a step into the aisle. That's not my baby. The priest pulled his hands back from the infant like he'd been burned. He looked at my mother-in-law with complete bewilderment, then looked at us, then back at her. My father-in-law spoke from his pew without even looking at my wife. Sit down, you're making a scene. My wife ignored him completely. She walked toward the altar, toward her mother, and her voice cracked when she spoke again. Mom, where did you even get him? Whose baby is that? Her mother finally turned around, and she looked annoyed, like my wife was being deliberately difficult about something perfectly reasonable. We've been telling everyone we have a grandson. We're not going back on that now. My wife stopped walking. You've been, what? Her mother looked at her like she was explaining something obvious to a child. Girls leave. Girls become someone else's family. They're not worth the investment. We needed an heir, not a placeholder. My wife reached for the baby on the altar. Her mother grabbed her wrist hard enough to make her gasp. Don't touch him. The priest stepped back, hands raised. Ma'am, please. My mother-in-law ignored him and turned back to my wife, still gripping her wrist. You can keep your daughter if you want, but this is the grandchild we're presenting to the family. This is the one that matters. Someone in the pews behind us whispered, oh my God, and I heard shuffling as other guests started to realize what was happening. I looked at my father-in-law and he was just sitting there, arms crossed, like this was all perfectly normal. My wife yanked her arm free. She laughed, but it wasn't really a laugh. It was a sharp, broken sound that made my chest hurt. My wife stared at her for a long moment. The whole church had gone silent, except for the baby fussing on the altar. Then she looked at me, and I was already grabbing the diaper bag because I knew exactly what that look meant. She turned back to her mother, and her voice dropped to something quiet and final. We're done. You're never meeting her. You're never calling us again. This is over. Her mother scoffed. You'll come around once you've calmed down. You always do. My wife didn't flinch. I've never been calmer in my life. She turned and walked toward the side door without looking back. Her mother called after her, but my wife didn't stop. We never found out whose baby they brought.